Welcome in, whiskey freaks, to the Blind Tasting Podcast, your #1 attitudinal bourbon destination. I'm John Stark, and today I'll be doing an in-depth review of Elijah Craig 18-year-old straight bourbon whiskey. You may be thinking, it's 18 years old, and it's Elijah Craig, so it's going to be amazing, right? The older the better, right? Well, not so fast, kids. Age is only part of the equation. Now, without going into too much science, too much aging can actually cause it to lose flavor, or in some cases, too much time in the barrel can lead to too much oak and cause it to lose some of that sweetness or that fruitiness that lots of us enjoy, and I'm included in that group. Anyway, it's 18, it's legal, let's find out. Is it all hype or is it all good? So here's the deal. You all know I normally like to review the easier to get stuff. Actually, I've made it a point on this podcast, and I get pretty pissed off when I see folks, carrying on about complete and total unicorns. The kind that we'll never see or never be able to afford if we do find them. Now, I mentioned Millennium recently. You got 7,500 doll hairs laying around? Right, me neither. So, why don't we put our efforts into things we can get our hands on? In this case, direct your attention to Elijah Craig 18. Now, I picked this up a couple months back for $179, which I know, it's more than I should have paid. But sometimes we all do stupid things, right? And I don't feel like I got mugged along the highway or anything, so there's that. Anyway, so I went into the shop and I asked the shop owner if he had any in the back. Famous last words, right? Well, surprise, surprise. I got this beautiful bottle of 18-year-old whiskey. Now, I just couldn't pass it up. It had been a long time since I'd had the chance to even see it, much less get it. So it hurt the wallet, but I pulled the trigger anyway. It's something I've had on the radar for a good while now, and now it's mine. Folks, I can't stress it enough. Develop a relationship with your shop owners. It creates a win-win for them and for you. So he got rid of some of his higher-priced whiskey, and I got this Elijah Craig bucket list bourbon to add to my collection. Oh, and that's a topic I want to bring up in the future. Having a collection. Don't get me started on that. If I get sidetracked on that, I'll never finish this review. Anyway, so my bottle is from barrel 6484, and it was bottled on August 18th, 2023. It's a straight bourbon whiskey from Heaven Hill, and it comes in at just 90 proof, and that's interesting to me. Heaven Hill went to all the trouble, and the time, more importantly, of aging it for 18 long years, and then they bottled it at just 90 proof. I wonder if that might come into play as we sip it here in a few minutes. Well, we'll see. The age of the whiskey is obviously 18 years. It's not blended or mixed with anything else. This is a bottle of single barrel bourbon whiskey, and that means it will be somewhat different than other single barrels, but I think it's going to have some of the basic characteristics. They should all be in there. I always like to mention the bottle design. This bottle is a rounded, kind of bulging version of the standard Elijah Craig bottle, if you can picture that. Nothing eye-catching. It's different enough to tell them apart from a distance. Oh, and some fun fact about Heaven Hill, and more specifically Elijah Craig himself. He was actually a Baptist preacher. I know, right? Seriously, you know any Baptist preachers making whiskey? Yeah, me neither. So he wasn't turning water into wine, but he was turning good mash into fine whiskey, and that was his game. So the next time you pour some Elijah Craig whiskey, maybe, just maybe, say a little prayer and thank the Lord for Reverend Elijah Craig. And speaking of mash, the mash bill of Elijah Craig consists of 78 corn, 10 rye, and 12% malted barley. And if I'm not mistaken, this is what they use. This is the mash bill they use for all Elijah Craig bourbon offerings. This one, obviously, just being aged super long. Now, the color is technically an auburn or a 1.5 on the color scale, my opinion. I liken it to a dark copper color. Of course, as I always say, the color is probably debatable, especially if you're counting on me for this piece of the puzzle. This one would probably present better if it had been bottled at a higher proof. Watering it down, proofing it down to 90 has faded it quite a bit in my opinion. To me, I said this before, how a whiskey looks can really tell you about the extent of the flavors you're about to receive. The darker the hue, usually the deeper the flavor. Not always, but in a lot of cases, it's always worth mentioning. So let me open this bottle and get a pour. Now, I taste out of your typical Glencairn glass. Not always. And like I always say, drink whiskey out of whatever you want to drink it out of. But for tasting, I do try to use the Glencairn. Before I go any further, I just want to let you know how much time I am going to save you right now. So I've done all the research. Keep in mind, I almost always poke around a little bit on the internets just to see what others have said about certain whiskeys, and this time was no exception. Now understand, this does not impact my opinion about a whiskey. I'm not going to let that happen, but I want to get the lay of the land. So I did my homework on this one, and now you can just sit back, relax, sip whiskey, and listen to the podcast. Now in this case, I was blown away by what other reputable folks are saying about Elijah Craig 18. No, I'm not going to name them by name. That's not terribly important, but you know them well enough. They're always breaking news about bourbon and advocating for whiskey, those kind of folks. So I'm going to share with you what some of these experts have said about Elijah Craig 18. Here we go. Elijah Craig 18 year is a bourbon lover's dream. And here's one. Elijah Craig 18-year-old offers an exquisite balance of sweet and spice. Sounding damn good, right? Aged bourbon at its best, Elijah Craig 18-year-old presents a symphony of flavors. Holy crap, a symphony? Okay, last one. This bourbon's depth and complexity are unmatched. Folks, these descriptions, they're coming from the experts. So, case closed, right? Well, I don't like to be BS'd. And to me, these descriptions, well, they sound a lot like BS. Why would they use terminology like this to describe Elijah Craig 18? Well, your guess is as good as mine. Maybe they're right. Could it really be that good? Well, I'm willing to keep an open mind. But they make it sound like it might just be the best bourbon you're ever going to put in your mouth. Well, there's only one way to find out, so let's get into this pour. So I'm going to swirl it around, give it a nosing. Right off the bat, I'm getting cherry Coke, which is interesting. Maybe some peach. Tons of dusty oak. And, you're getting a little bit of caramel, however you say it, and brown sugar. It's fairly complex on the nose, actually. It's nice. Let me get a little sip here. I'm going to move it around a little bit. Let it roll off the tongue. I'm getting a sweetness I'm really loving. Some dark fruit. Some pepper. Well, the pepper's coming through pretty strong. Lots and lots of dusty oak. And I think that makes sense for as long as this has been sitting in the barrel. Just getting a tinge of leather, maybe here just at the end. It's nice enough. It's not unmatched, but it is enjoyable. Let me get another sip here and then see what we get with the finish. So it's creamy. That's nice. Doesn't last very long though. The oak, dang, it's dry. It's kind of fading fast. There's really not There's really not a lot to the finish. It's not unpleasant. I think I was expecting a bit more from the bourbon lover's dream of whiskey. Overall, it's good. It's very good. But is it a bourbon lover's dream or exquisite or a symphony, like the experts say? Remember, whiskey freaks, you're going to pay at least $150 for this stuff. So it should be an exquisite symphony, right? I mean, you heard those guys. Well, here's what I think. And this is coming from a guy that doesn't see very well, who had just enough cash in his pocket to catch an Uber to his favorite liquor store and to finally get my hands on this very old bourbon whiskey. So what's my verdict? I'll be right back after the money spot to reveal today's verdict. Are you maybe looking to update your bar or man cave with some great photographs or wall art? Head over to famousdocs.etsy.com and pick up some fantastic prohibition, whiskey, and gangster-related photographs and art. And if you purchase 4 or more items, you'll get 20% off your entire order for a limited time. That's famousdocs.etsy.com. famousdocs.etsy.com. Remember, there are 3 options at the Blind Tasting Podcast for the verdict. Are we going to keep it, collect it, or cull it? To keep it, now that means to proudly display it in your liquor cabinet or bar. This stuff is good for a pour anytime. No need to stock up since it's always available. Collect it. That means grab another bottle or 2 since you find it so darn delicious, or since it just may not be easy to obtain. And our last possible verdict is to cull it. Pass it on to an annoying neighbor, or use it to preserve specimens in your laboratory. In the case of Elijah Craig 18, I say, keep it. It's great. It's not amazing. It's not a symphony in your mouth, but it's really good. Will I buy it again? Probably not. At 90 proof and over 150 doll hairs, they've really done a disservice here. I'll keep this bottle and I'll share it from time to time with others, but I'm crossing my fingers that Heaven Hill will raise the proof point someday. If they do, I'll seek it out and I'll try it again. You know, I wonder if Reverend Elijah Craig himself would be happy with this at just 90 proof. If I ever get the chance to talk to Connor O'Driscoll, and he's the master distiller now at Heaven Hill, I might ask him, why such a low proof point? I mean, other than the obvious answer of cost, I think I'd raise the proof point, charge a few doll hairs more, and then maybe, just maybe, that symphony would take the stage. Last but not least, folks, let's give a shout out to the farmers, distillery production guys and gals, warehouse workers, bottlers, and truck drivers. They make it happen, so cheers to all of them. Well, that's all I got for today, Whiskey Freaks. Thanks for listening to the Blind Tasting Podcast, your #1 attitudinal bourbon destination.